Uh, since the conflict started in the Western media, there has been considerable amount of attention to the political dimensions of the conflict, which focus on the authoritarian, totalitarian, and corruptible character and operation of the Bashar al-Assad's government. However, there is very little attention has been given to me, one of the crucial factors, crucial root causes of the conflict, which is the political economy dimension of Syrian conflict, which is also common to other so-called Arab Spring countries. So why people are rebelling? Why suddenly they realize that they are under an oppressive, corrupt regime? So why now? Why not before? Because the regimes, the character of the regimes, the lack of democracy, the single-party regime has been there since probably the beginning of the post-colonial period. But things just blew out at this particular time. So that's why I think one needs to look at global political economy factors in order to understand the root causes of the conflict. So when Bashar Assad, the young Assad, a Western-educated ophthalmologist, came to power in 2000, it was inevitable that there will be some clashes within the party, within the ruling elite in Syria, between his so-called new modernist methods and tendencies and the old guard, which was in power under his father. The old guard were the founders of the Alawite Ba'athist, kind of socialist welfare status regime of Syria, which was still authoritarian, which was still single party, which was still not democratic, but at least the previous regime put pressure on providing some incentives to the people to establish some alliances to various sectors, mainly urban working class and the peasantry and the middle class as well. But when Bashar al-Assad came to power, he has different ideas, he has different expectations in terms of the economic dimensions of the regime. So he favored the adaptation of Western neoliberal agenda and a kind of neoliberalism, which is very similar to the neoliberalism which was put into practice since 1980s in many other parts of the world. After the death of his father, he started to implement his policies, which came to be known as so-called Damascus Spring. And he introduced a series of committees of civil society. So this all created the impression that he was for opening, he was for democracy, he was for liberalization. But indeed, what he basically introduced was mainly opening the economy and the economic area to all kinds of private and foreign investors. But in terms of the democratic area, in terms of the social and political organizations, nothing actually changed. And in this period, Syria also tried everything to join all those global US-led organizations like World Trade Organization, IMF, and the other institutions, and invited all Western major multinational financial institutions to Syria. So a number of foreign entities, private entities, including Citibank and HSBC, they expanded their operations in Syria during this period, and they started to lend money at very high interest rates. In 2006, the Syrian regime under Bashar Assad and his new guard, so-called new guard, he changed a number of key elites in the government. They became the fourth largest recipient of the foreign direct investment in the world. So as a result of these policies, he achieved some kind of economic success. And the foreign and Arab investment, for instance, was $115 million in 2001. In 2006, this increased to $1.6 billion. So a massive, a very sharp increase in terms of foreign investments in Syria. And during this period, he replaced a number of key members of the political and economic elite, including Minister of Economy, and someone called Lamia Assi became the new Minister of Economy and Trade, and he was fully supporting the new neoliberal agenda. And up to this point, Assad's policies, economic policies, were completely indistinguishable from Western neoliberalism, which was put into practice in Latin America, in Europe, in Asia, at least in the previous decade. But he fully resisted all kind of political opening, and therefore his main goal remained only within the area of the economic liberalization. And all these policies benefited some small elite at the top, but the large number of people, especially in the villages, in medium-sized cities like Dara and Hama, were completely abandoned. All those previous social welfare type of incentives and jobs gradually disappeared, and those populations became completely desperate. So all these were already clear in 2006-07. And in those years, there were some indications of emerging unhappiness and some small-scale rebellions in various parts of the country. So also, unlike his father, Bashar al-Assad also sought to decrease the reliance of the Syrian regime on Russia and Iran. So under his father, Iran and Russia were two major powers providing various economic and military support to the Syrian regime, which was also helping the regime to provide some incentives to people. So under new regime, all this was brought to a very minimum level. So as a result of all this, the previous situation, which was basically based on cultivating popular legitimacy, or at least popular support, by combining authoritarianism with some redistributive wealth, which was there from the beginning of the post-colonial period, disappeared. That so-called authoritarian populism disappeared, and which was replaced by something which we can call neoliberal, the authoritarian neoliberalism in Syria. So as a result of this, the gap between rich and poor expanded amazingly, not only in Syria, in all other countries as well, as we discussed this last year in another seminar, starting from Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, Syria. The gap in this period increased substantially between rich and poor. And all this happened as a result of a fusion between neoliberalism and authoritarian forces. So to understand the origins of the revolts, origins of the rebellion, origins of the hate in the country, one therefore needs to explore the longer-term implications of this change, this shift from kind of an authoritarian populism to authoritarian neoliberalism, because authoritarian neoliberalism moved away from even bothering, even considering any kind of incentives to keep some sections of society happy. And all those names like investment, growth, modernity became the key terms in this period. And all those policies introduced under Bashar al-Assad organized around a kind of a media campaign using these terms, investment, growth, and modernity. But as a result of this, social polarization and discontent reached extraordinary levels by mid to late 2000s. And there was also an organic link, a natural link between emergence of a free market, sharp neoliberal regime and the coercive authoritarian rule. Because all those aspects of the neoliberal economy couldn't have been imposed without a much more coercive authoritarian regime. So the gap emerged as a result of disappearance of the previous social welfare elements, aspects. Now that gap was filled by increasing the power and the operations of the secret police, military, and the security in all areas. Any kind of indications of rebellion, unhappiness, was faced with much harsher authoritarian control in this period. So in this sense, the introduction of the harsh neoliberal measures and the increase of the authoritarian control went hand in hand. So one aspect required the other aspect. And in this period, the state's reliance of the private sector increased substantially. All those tens of thousands of people previously employed or provided income by the state sector, they found themselves at the mercy of the new private investors, which employed only a very small number of people in their new economic policies. And most of the liberalization was piecemeal and gradual. But the most important thing is, in this period, there was a decisive turn towards the harsh market economy led by the private and foreign investors. So in order to conclude, as a result of this, the populations in Syria are are forced to lead a kind of a dual struggle. One is they are battling against the Ba'ath regime's authoritarianism and harsh methods of the security apparatus, but also at the same time they are also attempting to contest global neoliberalism. So what was happening in Syria wasn't independent of the global policies. So global institutions, IMF, World Bank, World Trade Organizations, were directly part of this. And if you look at the reports, just a few months before the uprising started in Syria, if you look at the reports of the World Bank, IMF, and other international organizations, they were all praising the policies of the government. They were saying that the government was doing the right thing, the liberalization of the finance sector, liberalization of the economy, liberalization of the currency was maybe a bit harsh, but this is the right thing to do. And they were talking about unemployment, they were talking about increased poverty, but saying that in order to solve all these problems, we have to continue these harsh measures. So I think one of the reports I found was just a week before the uprising started from IMF, which was praising the government, saying that in the world, the Syrian government is one of the leading examples of the successful neoliberalization. So I think I should stop here and to leave my colleagues.
Thank you very much.